Thank you. Does that mean I can have 6 minutes?
No. No.
Yeah. So I have nothing to disclose. This presentation deals with investigation of dynamic features of pelvic floor muscle contraction and whether those measures can differentiate between men with and without incontinence after prostatectomy. The basis for this work is that there's a series of muscles that can control continence in men and as well as in women. And this includes the smooth muscle of the prostate, in the prostatic urethra and the bladder neck, the levator ani muscle, the striated urethral sphincter, and the bulbar cavernosus. Clearly, when a man has prostatectomy, he loses his prostatic urethra, which takes most of the smooth muscle of the urethra. So what this means is that there is also potentially damage to the bladder neck, there's also potential damage to the striated urethral sphincter, and if continence is to be recovered, there needs to be a modification of function of the striated muscles to compensate for the lost contribution from the smooth muscle. And if the sphincter is interrupted as well, then there will also need to be compensation by the bulbar cavernosus and puborectalis to take over for that muscle. So the purpose of this study was to test the hypothesis that continence status after radical prostatectomy may depend on pelvic floor muscle function. So we aim to compare features of dynamic contraction of pelvic floor between men with incontinence after prostatectomy, those without incontinence after prostatectomy, and a group of healthy control men who had no history of prostate cancer or incontinence. And we also aimed to find whether there was a property that allowed us to discriminate clearly between the two groups. So our measure was transperineal ultrasound imaging, and the basis for this is that different muscles displace tissues in different directions. So the puborectalis pulls forwards on the anorectal junction and the bladder neck, the striated urethral sphincter pulls backwards towards the perineal body, and bulbar cavernosus compresses the bulb penis. And what you can see in the next slide is a contraction on ultrasound, and you can see each of those three muscles contracting with the different coloured arrows. So our first observation is that if we look at this data, which is control men in green, the continent post-prostatectomy men in blue, and the incontinent post-prostatectomy men in orange, when a man does a voluntary contraction of pelvic floor muscles, the men with incontinence push their pelvic floor down, their bladder base goes down, similar to what has been observed in women with stress incontinence. And there's also less displacement of the striated urethral sphincter. So what this says is more pushing from above, less contraction from below. We're affecting both sides of the equation that you require to maintain for continence. There is also a strong positive linear correlation between each of these measures and the severity of incontinence. And if a man can shorten his sphincter by 4.1 millimetres and lift his bladder by 2.4 millimetres during a contraction, we get a good sensitivity and specificity for identifying whether someone is continent or not. If we look at this data, this shows now an evoked cough, and what I'm showing you is in particular that when a man coughs and maintains continence after prostatectomy, the ones who are continent have better control than someone who has never had prostate cancer. They also have less drop of the urethrovesical junction. So men with prostatectomy have to be superhuman to maintain continence with coughing after surgery. So we've been able to show that we can discriminate between men with and without incontinence based on dynamic properties of pelvic floor muscle contraction. We've shown that during voluntary contraction, continent men have greater shortening of the sphincter and puborectalis and bulbar cavernosus, and that during coughing, men have to be superhuman. So I'll finish there acknowledging the people who gave us financial support. Thank you.
Thank you. You got 4 minutes, actually. Questions?
Hi, I'm Petra Vorm from the Netherlands, Leiden. Did you look if these men did have nerve sparing or not after surgery during prostate cancer surgery?
There's a really important feature about that, and that is that nerve-sparing procedures preserve the innervation for the vasculature. So it preserves the neurovascular bundle that's important for maintaining erection. It's not actually about whether you're preserving the motor innervation for these muscles. But when they're precise and careful, they do try to preserve the innervation of these muscles. What we know from this study is that with the ultrasound we can see the motion from this muscle contracting in each of these men, although in some men it's less, which means that even if it wasn't a nerve-sparing procedure, there is some retained ability to contract these muscles. So we're certainly interested whether nerve-sparing has an impact, but it's different nerves that they're trying to spare in that procedure.
Yeah, I know, but sometimes... And also the length of the urethral sphincter. Sometimes there is a part of the urethral sphincter taken out
Yes.
during surgery. Did you look at that?
So that's probably one of the explanations why some men have lesser contraction.
Yeah.
So an important thing is that there is data that shows that the length of the length of the urethra is a determinant of continence, but it's not the only determinant. The capacity of muscle to produce compression of the urethra is a strong determinant as well.
Okay, thank you.
We have time for another question. Carrie?
Thank you for a very good presentation. I was just wondering about the fact that you found that they were pressing down, which is different from not being able to contract. So they were actually straining instead of contracting, or could you elaborate a bit on that?
Men try to contract their pelvic floor. Many men have poor awareness of what they're doing and they'll contract their abdominals instead. So for those men, when they push down, they're contracting their abdominal muscles. So we can train that and we can change that, and that's a basis of our intervention, is to try and improve the pattern, the quality of activation. And they are contracting the pelvic floor in those conditions. In coughing, we've done some studies with men looking at the normal pattern of coughing in healthy individuals and people with incontinence and many other situations. And even healthy men do get a small amount of depression of the bladder base at the initiation of the cough. So there is some small movement.
Absolutely,
it's just that it's worse in the people who are incontinent.
But I was just, were every one of them straining? Because in women, no.
No. So the ones who are continent didn't at all, and the ones who are incontinent, on average, there was depression.
On average, yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We can.